When I flipped that physical toggle relay at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a humid Tuesday afternoon, 847 heavy freight trucks across the Memphis Industrial Corridor instantly lost their active routing feeds. Traffic signals frozen in mid-cycle began flashing default cautionary yellow. Loading dock queue displays at 23 major warehousing centers went completely black. 4 years and 8 months of flawless, mathematically optimized logistics coordination vanished in the span of 3 seconds. Sitting in a worn vinyl booth at Mickey's Diner 20 minutes outside the city, I took a deliberate sip of scalding black coffee while Victoria Sinclair's self-proclaimed corporate logistics empire disintegrated in real time across my laptop screen. To understand how a Fortune 500 distribution client found itself completely paralyzed by a single remote command, you have to understand who I am and how I operate. My name is Raymond Vance. I am 48 years old, and I have operated an independent transportation infrastructure consultancy for 23 years. Before stepping into the private sector, I spent 6 grueling years in the United States Army managing tactical supply convoys through active conflict zones. In military logistics, system failure is not measured in quarterly profit drops or minor customer inconvenience. If your routing calculations crash or your vehicle telemetry drops in the desert, soldiers die. That environment teaches you a fundamental truth that civilian corporate executives rarely comprehend. Real operations are governed by physical friction, hardware integrity, and unyielding mathematical reality, not fancy slide presentations or buzzwords. I operate Vance Logistics Systems out of a converted 2-car garage workshop behind my modest ranch home outside Memphis. I do not maintain a sleek glass office downtown. I do not employ a team of smooth-talking account managers, nor do I publish promotional posts about synergistic corporate paradigms. My clients discover my services when their massive supply chains are tearing apart at the seams, when freight delays are threatening federal compliance permits, and when someone senior is about to be terminated by the board of directors. That was precisely the crisis facing Apex Freight Solutions 4 years and 8 months ago when Frank Morales called my landline at 6:15 on a rainy Thursday morning. Frank was the veteran chief of operations at Apex, a rough-edged logistics man who had spent 30 years working his way up from driving night shifts to managing regional distribution. His voice carried that tight, strained resonance peculiar to men who see their hard-earned pension slipping away into administrative disaster. Frank explained that Apex had just failed its 4th consecutive Department of Transportation Safety and Route Compliance audit in 2 years. State highway regulators were threatening to revoke their interstate freight transport licenses within 30 days. Their internal operations were an unmitigated disaster. 3 legacy software suites that refused to communicate, manual dispatch logs filled with clerical errors, and massive truck queues spilling onto public highways every morning. When I arrived at their primary facility that morning, the inefficiency was astonishing. Dozens of 18-wheelers sat idling at entrance gates while dispatchers screamed into radios, trying to figure out bay assignments. Loading dock crews stood around smoking cigarettes because dock scheduling software was stuck in a recurring database loop. Drivers were blowing through legal service hour limits, simply waiting in line to unload cargo. Every shift change wasted nearly 2 hours just attempting to synchronize basic routing records across incompatible computer databases. Frank walked me through the roaring chaos of the primary cross-docking bay, rubbing his tired face. He told me he did not need another high-priced consulting firm sending junior analysts in tailored suits to hand him colorful charts. He needed an operational engine that actually functioned under real-world pressure. I spent the subsequent 18 months building that exact engine from the ground up. I did not install an off-the-shelf corporate software package that forced their drivers and warehouse personnel to adapt to rigid, pre-packaged workflows. Instead, I hand-coded a custom routing and scheduling infrastructure comprising 120,000 lines of high-performance C++ and Python code. I built proprietary algorithms that learned the micro-traffic patterns of the Memphis freight grid, dynamically synchronizing dispatch outputs with municipal traffic signal infrastructure. I integrated direct telemetry tracking for every rig in the fleet, automatically calculating real-time rerouting around highway accidents, weather delays, and fuel stops. Crucially, I built the system with a hardware-decoupled architecture. The core execution engine, database relays, and algorithmic optimization servers did not reside on Apex Freight's internal office network. They ran exclusively through dedicated private servers connected to a physical control console inside my garage workshop. Apex computers received only processed user interface outputs, visual dashboards, dispatch printouts, and driver navigation cues. The contract Frank Morales, signed on behalf of Apex Freight Solutions, was crystal clear and reviewed by their corporate legal counsel. Under Section 4 of the service agreement, Apex leased operational access to the system outputs for a fixed monthly fee. I retained absolute, unyielding ownership of all underlying source code, system architecture, database design, trade secrets, and intellectual property pursuant to Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. Frank signed the document without a second thought. As an old-school operator, he recognized the difference between renting a high-performance machine and owning the patent to build it. For 4 years and 8 months, the arrangement functioned perfectly. My monthly leasing invoices were paid like clockwork on the first business day of every month. State safety auditors conducted 2 comprehensive reviews and issued perfect compliance ratings. Missing delivery windows dropped to absolute zero. Fuel consumption across the fleet dropped by 14%, generating millions in net annual savings for Apex. Frank Morales frequently sent me detailed performance reports detailing operational efficiency gains, accompanied by personal notes expressing gratitude. Then, 6 months ago, Frank Morales announced his retirement. 3 weeks later, Victoria Sinclair stepped into the executive office as the new vice president of global supply chain operations. Victoria Sinclair arrived carrying a fresh Master of Business Administration degree from Northwestern University, dressed in tailored Italian designer suits, and bearing the supreme fragile confidence of an executive who believes corporate authority is synonymous with operational mastery. She was in her mid-30s, traveled with a leather portfolio that cost more than my monthly truck payment, and viewed the entire logistics industry through the narrow lens of financial spreadsheets and cost-cutting initiatives. Her very first communication to me was not an introduction or a courtesy call to discuss operational continuity. It was a cold, formal email delivered at 7:45 on a Monday morning with the subject line, Vendor Expenditure Optimization Audit. The body of the message was filled with sterile corporate terminology regarding recurring third-party operational expenses, vendor consolidation directives, and mandatory contract rationalization. She noted that my monthly licensing fee appeared as a significant recurring line item on the departmental budget. In her estimation, paying an external consultant an ongoing fee for software operating on their distribution network represented an unacceptable operational inefficiency that required immediate correction. I responded professionally within an hour, attaching a digital copy of the original executed contract signed by Frank Morales and corporate legal counsel, alongside a detailed summary of performance metrics showing 0 compliance violations and millions in documented cost savings over 4 years and 8 months. My tone was calm, courteous, and precise. Her reply arrived less than 2 hours later, brimming with dismissive condescension. She informed me that all historic vendor agreements were undergoing the comprehensive internal assessment by her newly appointed Operational Efficiency Task Force. She requested that I immediately prepare complete technical documentation, architectural blueprints, database schemas, and source code repositories for internal review so her team could assess the long-term viability of the framework. That single request made her intentions glaringly obvious. Victoria Sinclair did not want to conduct a standard vendor review. She intended to confiscate my trade secrets, ingest my custom algorithms into Apex's internal servers, terminate my contract, and claim credit before the executive board for eliminating a major vendor expense while keeping my custom infrastructure running. I drafted a response indicating that under the terms of our executed lease agreement, Technical documentation pertaining to system interface outputs was readily available, but proprietary core logic and underlying code remained exclusive trade secrets protected under federal law. 3 days later, Victoria escalated the conflict. She dispatched an email with the subject line, "Software Package Transition Requirements." The tone was no longer polite. She asserted that because Apex Freight Solutions had funded the monthly leasing fees for nearly 5 years, the operational logic and underlying software constituted corporate work-for-hire assets belonging entirely to Apex Freight Solutions. She demanded full root administrative credentials, server decryption keys, and complete repository access by the end of the week. I sat back in my desk chair inside my garage workshop, looking at the glowing LED indicators of my custom physical control console. It was fascinating to witness an educated executive exhibit such profound ignorance regarding contract law and software architecture. Under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, an independent contractor retains full copyright ownership of all created works unless a specific written agreement explicitly designates the work as a work for hire prior to creation. Furthermore, under the Defend Trade Secrets Act, codified in Title 18, United States Code, Section 1836, any unauthorized attempt by a corporation to copy, appropriate, or assimilate proprietary trade secrets carries severe civil and criminal liabilities. I sent back a final written warning attaching Section 4 of the original contract, highlighting the explicit reservation of intellectual property rights in bold text. I noted that any attempt to forcibly bypass server security or reverse engineer system outputs would constitute an intentional violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1030. 2 hours later, Victoria sent her definitive response. "We are terminating your service agreement, effective immediately. Pursuant to corporate policy, all external access will be revoked. Please submit your final invoice for process services to procurement. We will manage all operational infrastructure internally going forward. Thank you for your past contributions." She had fired me with a 3-sentence email, believing she could simply cut off my monthly fee and keep the engine humming without my permission. 4 days after sending that termination notice, Victoria scheduled a virtual meeting titled Infrastructure Handoff and Transition Review. She clearly expected me to attend, hand over server keys like a defeated vendor, and meekly walk away. I logged into the video conference at exactly 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes ahead of schedule. I wore a plain ironed button-down shirt. Behind me, the camera captured my organized home office wall, displaying my state professional engineering license and my military commendation certificates from my deployment years. Victoria Sinclair logged in 3 minutes late. She sat in an opulent executive conference room, flanked by 2 people, Deborah Thorne, the head of corporate procurement, and Ashley Sinclair, a junior compliance analyst who happened to be Victoria's younger cousin. Notably absent from the screen was Garrett Brooks, the veteran operations supervisor who had served under Frank Morales and actually understood how freight trucks move through physical space. "Raymond," Victoria began, her voice dripping with artificial executive warmth. "As communicated in our formal termination notice, Apex Freight Solutions has finalized its strategy to internalize all logistics management. We appreciate your foundational work over the past 4 years, but we are now ready to take direct ownership of the operational framework." I kept my hands folded calmly on the desk. "To clarify for the record, Victoria, you are electing to terminate the operational lease agreement for Vance Logistics Systems. Is that correct?" "That is correct." Deborah Thorne chimed in, adjusting her glasses. "From a procurement standpoint, paying an external licensing fee for operational software is no longer aligned with our cost containment directives." Victoria leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished mahogany table. "We expect full transmission of all back-end repository files, administrative passwords, encryption keys, and system architecture manuals by 5 p.m. tomorrow, so our internal information technology team can complete the system migration." I looked directly into the camera lens. "I am afraid that will not be happening. Your lease agreement granted Apex operational access to system outputs. You never purchased ownership of the core technology. You do not own the code, you do not own the algorithms, and you do not possess legal authorization to operate the infrastructure once the lease terminates. Victoria's polite expression hardened instantly. Her eyes narrowed as she tabbed her designer pen against her portfolio. Raymond, let us not make this unnecessarily difficult. Apex paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 4 years. That investment gives us full entitlement to the intellectual property. Our corporate legal team is fully prepared to file an immediate injunction if you attempt to withhold our operational assets. Your legal team is welcome to read Section 4 of the contract they signed, I replied calmly. You paid for operational utility, not asset acquisition. You bought the milk, you did not buy the cow. The moment your termination becomes effective, all operational licensing rights extinguish entirely. Silence fell over the video connection. Deborah Thorne looked visibly uneasy, glancing down at her copy of the contract. Ashley Sinclair stopped taking notes entirely. Victoria forced a cold, dismissive smile. We will expect delivery of the system documentation by end of business tomorrow, Raymond. We will determine how to proceed regarding system access. You will receive exactly what your contract entitles you to receive, I said softly, and disconnected from the call before she could utter another corporate platitude. The following morning, I set to work building Victoria Sinclair's transition package. I did not send her angry emails, nor did I lodge empty threats. Instead, I compiled a meticulously formatted, highly impressive documentation package filled with elegant color schematics, user interface flowcharts, dashboard layout diagrams, and operational user manuals. To an untrained corporate eye like Victoria's, the package looked like the complete master blueprint of a multi-million-dollar logistics platform. It contained polished screenshots of active dispatch panels, traffic signal synchronization indicators, and dynamic vehicle rerouting displays. However, every single visual component in that package represented nothing more than surface-level user interface graphics. It contained 0 lines of underlying source code, 0 algorithmic execution modules, and 0 back-end database connection protocols. I was giving her precisely what she insisted she owned: the visual steering wheel of a car whose engine remained locked inside my garage, workshop 20 minutes away. At 4:45 p.m. on Monday afternoon, I transmitted the digital package to Victoria Sinclair, Deborah Thorne, and Apex Corporate Legal Counsel with a succinct cover note. System interface documentation provided pursuant to contract termination notice. Core operational infrastructure and back-end server access remain proprietary intellectual property of Vance Logistics Systems. Lease expiration takes effect at midnight. Then I walked out to my garage workshop. The space smelled of machine oil, solder, and clean pine. On my heavy oak workbench sat the physical control panel I had engineered specifically for the Apex Network project. It was a brushed aluminum console housing dedicated physical relay switches, hardwired circuit breakers, and encrypted hardware communication modules connected directly to my private optical fiber servers. Every subsystem had its own physical indicator light and dedicated breaker toggle. North Corridor traffic synchronization, Westgate dock scheduling, dynamic fleet telemetry, DOT compliance logging, and master systems relay. Every light glowed a steady, reassuring emerald green. Every circuit was functioning at peak efficiency, processing thousands of real-time data packets per second for the freight moving across Tennessee. I sat at my bench, placed my hand on the cool metal master relay switch, and waited. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. I followed my standard routine, dressing in clean work clothes and driving my pickup truck down to Mickey's Diner. The diner was a quiet, unpretentious brick building situated near the highway, populated by long-haul truckers, local mechanics, and rail workers who appreciated strong coffee and honest food. I took my regular seat in the corner booth facing the parking lot. Nicole, who had worked the day shift at Mickey's for over 12 years, walked over with a steaming glass pot and poured my black coffee without asking. "Morning, Ray," she said, setting down a heavy ceramic mug. "You look quiet today." "Just watching the wheels turn, Nicole," I replied with a faint smile. I opened my laptop, connected to my secure private cellular hotspot, and loaded the administrative monitoring console for the Apex Freight Network. The live telemetry map showed 847 heavy transport rigs moving in synchronized harmony across the interstate highways and industrial arteries of Memphis. At 23 distribution centers, loading docks were operating with mathematical precision, turning around rigs in less than 18 minutes per bay. At 2:35 p.m., my mobile phone vibrated on the Formica table. The screen displayed a text message from Victoria Sinclair. Technical glitch on main dispatch interface. System requiring master administrative reauthentication. Provide root access credentials immediately. I read the message twice, set the phone back on the table screen down, and took a slow sip of coffee. 10 minutes later at 2:45 p.m., a second message arrived. This is an urgent operational request. Your failure to provide system access is impeding corporate workflow. Respond now. I ignored it. At exactly 2:47 p.m., I navigated to my remote hardware access terminal on my laptop, entered my 32-character master security key, and executed a remote trip command to the physical relay breaker sitting on my garage workbench. Across the server network, there was no loud explosion, no dramatic error pop-up, and no catastrophic database crash. I had designed the system termination to execute with elegant mathematical grace. The core algorithmic engine simply severed its external data pipelines and went completely dark. The front-end user interfaces installed on Apex Freight's office computers did not crash. Instead, they froze instantly, locking in their last recorded visual state. The dispatch screens continued displaying green indicators and perfect schedule graphics, but the underlying data stream feeding those screens stopped dead. 847 freight trucks carrying tens of millions of dollars in time-sensitive commercial freight instantly lost their active dynamic routing feeds. Onboard navigation units locked up, falling back to static default maps. Municipal traffic signal synchronization protocols along the primary industrial corridors defaulted to archaic, uncoordinated timers. Loading dock queue management algorithms stopped processing incoming rig telemetry. For the first 10 minutes, the corporate offices at Apex Freight Solutions likely noticed nothing wrong. Victoria Sinclair was probably sitting in her glass office, admiring her budget spreadsheet, convinced she had successfully trimmed vendor costs while preserving operational performance. By 3:00 p.m., the physical reality of logistics began tearing through her corporate illusion. I pulled up public highway traffic camera feeds on my laptop screen. At the intersection of Highway 58 and Industrial Parkway, a line of 16 heavy tractor trailers sat motionless at a red traffic light that refused to cycle back to green. Behind them, commuter traffic and secondary freight haulers began backing up for miles. At 3:15 p.m., live security feeds from Apex's primary Western distribution center showed complete gridlock at the main entrance gates. 42 18-wheelers had arrived simultaneously, all bearing automated dispatch printouts assigning them to the exact same loading bay, Bay 7. Without the active dynamic queue engine sorting incoming rigs based on weight and cargo priority, drivers were stepping out of their cabs, screaming at gate attendants and blocking access lanes. By 3:30 p.m., the ripple effect was turning into a regional transportation disaster. 6 major distribution facilities were completely paralyzed. Freight queues spilled out of industrial parks onto public interstate ramps. Local police departments began dispatching traffic control officers to manage the mounting gridlock. At 3:38 p.m., my phone began ringing continuously. The first call came from an unknown Memphis desk line. I let it ring through to voicemail. The second call came from Deborah Thorne in corporate procurement. I let it ring. The third, fourth, and fifth calls came directly from Victoria Sinclair's personal cell phone. I sat calmly in my booth at Mickey's Diner, watching the chaotic red dots multiply across the Memphis traffic map, sipping my black coffee as Nicole came by to refill my cup. By 4:00 p.m., my email inbox was exploding with high-priority messages marked with red exclamation flag subject. Urgent system paralysis. Immediate assistance required subject. Crickle distivation. Across all warehouse hubs subject. Compliance alerts. Regulatory violations accumulating. The messages were no longer written in condescending corporate terminology. The smooth, sanitized language of executive optimization had evaporated. replaced by raw corporate terror. I pulled up a financial monitoring sheet I had built to track operational impact. Based on standard freight delay metrics, driver overtime costs, fuel waste, missed delivery penalties, and regulatory non-compliance fines, Apex Freight Solutions was burning through approximately $180,000 for every hour the network remained paralyzed. If the shutdown extended through the night, perishable cargo spoilage and contractual breach claims from major retail clients would push losses past $3 million before sunrise. At 4:25 p.m., my phone rang again. The caller identification displayed the direct line of Garrett Brooks, the veteran operations supervisor. Knowing Garrett was an honest former Navy logistics specialist who had no part in Victoria's scheme, I answered. "Raymond," Garrett said, his voice trembling with sheer exhaustion and frustration. "It's complete hell down here. We've got 90 trucks backed up onto Interstate 40. Police are threatening to start towing rigs. Dispatch screens are showing green, but nothing is talking to anything. Victoria is locking herself in her office, screaming at tech support, but nobody knows what to do. Did you shut it down?" "My operational lease was terminated by your new vice president, Garrett," I answered calmly. Pursuant to her direct written order, all external system connections were severed at contract expiration. I am simply honoring her instructions. Garrett let out a long, heavy breath. "Ray, she lied to the board. She told everyone she had acquired full ownership of the software and that you were just an overpaid contractor being phased out. The executive board is convening an emergency session right now. Can you help us?" "I can restore full operational capacity in 20 minutes, Garrett," I replied, "but I will only deal with executive authority, and the terms will reflect emergency deployment conditions." "Hold on," Garrett said. "I'm walking into the boardroom right now." 10 minutes later at 4:45 p.m., an emergency calendar invitation hit my inbox. Executive Board Emergency Disaster Recovery Session. I logged into the video conference at 4:58 p.m. The screen revealed a room filled with visibly panicked senior executives. At the center of the conference table sat Calvin Montgomery, the senior executive vice president and representative of the board of directors. His tie was loosened, his sleeves were rolled up, and his face was pale. To his right sat two senior corporate attorneys frantically highlighting contract documents. In the far corner of the video frame sat Victoria Sinclair, stripped of her executive swagger, looking thoroughly humiliated as she stared blankly at her open designer portfolio. "Raymond," Calvin Montgomery began immediately, dispensing with all pleasantries. "We are facing a catastrophic operational failure across our entire regional network. Our operations are completely paralyzed, our compliance standing is in jeopardy, and our major retail clients are threatening immediate contract termination. We need to understand what it takes to bring our systems back online instantly." I maintained an unwavering, professional posture on camera. "Mr. Montgomery, as your legal team can confirm, your new vice president unilaterally terminated my operational lease agreement 4 days ago, claiming Apex Freight possessed corporate ownership of my proprietary software infrastructure." Calvin Montgomery turned a searing, lethal glare toward Victoria Sinclair, who shrank further into her chair. "We have reviewed the original contract signed by Frank Morales," Calvin said, his voice dropping an octave. "Our legal counsel has confirmed that Section 4 is completely ironclad under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106. Vance Logistics Systems retains exclusive copyright and trade secret ownership. Victoria Sinclair acted without board authorization and made fraudulent misrepresentations regarding asset ownership." One of the corporate attorneys leaned toward the microphone. "Raymond, we recognize that proprietary ownership resides entirely with you. However, given the extreme public safety and financial emergency, we appeal to your sense of professional partnership to restore access while we negotiate long-term terms." "This is not a matter of sentiment, counselor," I responded with icy precision. "Your organization attempted to illegally expropriate my trade secrets in direct violation of the Defend Trade Secrets Act under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1836. Furthermore, by making false representations to the board regarding software ownership, your executive leadership committed a severe breach of fiduciary duty exposing the enterprise to catastrophic operational destruction. I paused, letting the legal weight of those words settle over the room. The corporate attorneys remained completely silent. They knew every word I uttered was legally undeniable. In addition, I continued, if this operational paralysis continues past midnight, you will trigger mandatory employee layoff disclosures under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act due to involuntary facility shutdowns, multiplying your legal liability exponentially. Calvin Montgomery rubbed his temples, visibly shaken. Name your terms for immediate restoration, Raymond. I opened a pre-drafted document on my screen and read the terms clearly. First, immediate execution of an emergency operational recovery agreement covering a 72-hour restoration window. Second, payment of an emergency recovery fee equal to 2.5 times my standard monthly licensing rate, payable immediately via bank wire transfer prior to system reactivation. Third, formal, written corporate affirmation, acknowledging that all software source code, algorithms, hardware interfaces, and system architecture remain the exclusive intellectual property of Vance Logistics Systems. Fourth, complete indemnification protecting Vance Logistics Systems from any third-party liability or regulatory fines resulting from the shutdown caused by Victoria Sinclair's unauthorized contract termination. Calvin Montgomery looked at his two legal attorneys. Both men gave an immediate, emphatic nod of assent. Agreement accepted in full, Calvin stated without a second of hesitation. Finance is executing the wire transfer right now. Victoria Sinclair, hand over your security key card and exit this building immediately. Victoria Sinclair gathered her leather portfolio with trembling hands, refused to make eye contact with anyone, and walked out of the corporate conference room forever. 22 minutes later, at 5:26 p.m., my mobile banking application issued a clear chime notification. The emergency wire transfer had cleared into my business account, full payment, 0 deductions, 0 conditions. I opened my remote management console, entered my administrative verification code, and sent the signal to reset the master physical relay in my garage workshop. Across the Memphis industrial corridor, the recovery was instant and breathtaking. On my laptop screen, 847 red status indicators flashed simultaneously back to bright emerald green. Core algorithmic processing streams re-established encrypted connections with municipal traffic signal grids. Onboard rig navigation systems recalculated optimal routes, dispersing highway queues within minutes. Automated loading dock management engines at all 23 distribution facilities. Resumed dynamic scheduling, clearing vehicle bottlenecks at distribution gates with military efficiency. Within 18 minutes of reactivation, traffic congestion along the primary industrial corridors had completely cleared. Rigs were flowing smoothly, loading bays were turning around cargo, and Department of Transportation compliance, logging resumed continuous, flawless recording. I closed my laptop, finished the last cold drop of coffee in my cup, and laid a $20 bill on the table for Nicole. On Friday morning, 3 days after the shutdown, a new email landed in my inbox from Eleanor Croft, the newly appointed Vice President of Corporate Strategy at Apex Freight Solutions. Her communication contained no corporate posturing or cost-cutting threats. It contained a formal proposal for a 5-year master logistics infrastructure agreement. The proposed agreement tripled my previous monthly licensing fee, included guaranteed annual rate adjustments, funded complete hardware upgrades for my garage workshop control center, and contained ironclad legal clauses explicitly affirming my exclusive, unchallengeable ownership of all past, present, and future intellectual property under federal copyright and trade secret statutes. I reviewed the document carefully with my personal legal counsel, suggested 2 minor technical amendments, and signed the contract on Monday afternoon. Word of the Memphis freight paralysis and its instantaneous resolutions spread with astonishing speed throughout national logistics networks. Executive leadership across major transportation hubs quickly learned what happens when corporate arrogance attempts to bully a seasoned military logistics veteran who understands the fundamental distinction between renting functional access and owning core technology. By the end of the month, my business email was flooded with formal inquiries from major logistics operations in Nashville, Atlanta, Birmingham, and Dallas, all seeking custom infrastructure solutions built on the Vance Logistics Systems framework. I did not hire a fleet of sales representatives or move to a glass skyscraper. I remained in my modest ranch house outside Memphis, continuing to operate out of my garage workshop, surrounded by the physical circuit boards, aluminum control panels, and custom relays that keep the country's supply chains moving. Corporate suits with fancy degrees will always believe they can manipulate reality, with spreadsheets, slick presentations, and aggressive legal posturing. But out here in the real world, where rubber meets the asphalt and millions of tons of freight move through physical space, real power belongs to those who build the engine, write the code, and hold the master key. And as Victoria Sinclair learned the hard way, when you attempt to take what isn't yours, the only response you will ever receive is, "Not today."